Every runner has a story. What about you? What's your story? Running isn't easy. We've all overcome struggles to get to where we are. Maybe you're struggling now. What is it that stands in your way of reaching your full potential as a runner? And are you willing to do what it takes to get there? If you're not sure, listen to this story about how this runner overcame an obstacle that seemed absolutely impossible. And remember, if they can do it, you can do it too. What are your running goals? Do you need help recovering from a running injury? Do you need help developing a training plan? Maybe you've never ran before and you just want to get started. Let us help you reach that big goal of yours. Here at Body Smart, we help runners maximize their performance and stay on the road. To learn more, ask questions, or to set up your first free appointment, go to bodysmartutah.com or call us at 801-479-4471.
Hello and welcome to another Running Unbroken podcast. Today we've got a special treat. We've got Julie Hansen with us. She's a registered dietitian and an exercise physiologist and an all-around great human being. So today we're going to be talking about healthy eating, eating disorders, things along that line. But first, just want to ask you, what interested you in this line of work in the first place? How did you get into this?
How did I get into this? Well, when I was one of those people that when I was in high school, I knew I wanted to be a dietitian. So, and I never changed my mind. I knew exactly. I guess my mom had taken me to see a dietitian, and I thought, well, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But I guess, unfortunately, I did have an eating disorder. So I developed an eating disorder in high school that kind of carried through college in my early 20s. And then I think healing from that gave me, I guess, kind of the initiative that I wanted to work in this field. However, I will say it's taken a long time for me to get here because at first I didn't want to work in the field. So, but now I realize since I've got that experience, it really has been helpful. So I would say in the last 10 years, 15 years is when I've really started focusing more on eating disorders. Yeah.
What was it that kept you from wanting to go down that road?
You mean initially? I didn't, I was recovered. I didn't want to talk about it again. Yeah. And it's really only lately that I really even admit that I had one. So I don't really talk about it a lot, but Yeah.
How did that affect your life dealing with that at the time?
Well, I had stress fractures all the time. It wasn't great for running. I remember I defended my thesis in a walking boot.
No way. Wow.
I think they felt sorry for me. So they didn't ask me many questions.
Oh, she's dealing with
So there was that. I mean, so many stress fractures and injuries. Yeah.
Wow. And did you, at the time, were you able to connect that to, what was happening, with your eating and things?
No.
You're just why is this happening to me?
Right. Yeah. And even in my first marathon, I didn't fuel right. Because, the marathon was about losing weight, really.
Yeah. Oh.
So I didn't fuel very well. And so it was 17 years before I ran another one. And if I would have fueled, I think it would have been a wonderful experience. I think it would have been just great.
Yeah.
And I know.
So what was the difference between that first marathon versus the second?
Well, the funny thing is, so my first marathon was in Colorado, and I don't even know, it was in Parker, Colorado, and it was a double loop. Have you ever done a double loop marathon? No, let me just tell you. They put me into the tent afterwards. I mean, I think I ran 4 hours or something, but I don't know. But anyway, so then I ran, my real one was I wanted to run 27 miles on my 27th birthday. So I picked a marathon, the Dallas White Rock Marathon. That was the one I was really training for. And I kind of hit the wall. I think I came in at 3:45. And I know I could have broken 3:30. I know I could have. But anyway, so fast forward 17 years later, I actually did the same time, but it felt so much better.
You're yes, this is how it should have felt the first time.
So easy, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was kind of fun.
That's fascinating. But how interesting.
Yeah, I know how powerful nutrition is. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Well, so obviously it's becoming a lot. I think we're caring about it a lot more in high school and collegiate sports.
Yes.
But for the longest time, it was kind of pushed in the background,
Right.
we don't talk about those things.
Right.
Like, let's just focus on performance when it's obviously a crucial part of performance.
Right. But I don't think people can hide it much anymore. I mean, I think the doctors are now alerted, like, they know when there's stress fractures that something's probably wrong. And, we're checking more things like iron. We're doing a lot more testing, screening of athletes.
Yeah.
So because of my interest in running, and I've always been an athlete, like I kind of gravitated towards working with athletes and eating disorders, although I work with everybody, anybody with eating disorders. But I think that it just lends itself to that. And I really do like working with athletes because there's motivation.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
You can't train if you don't eat. So, and the coaches, are so good to work with usually. So.
Yeah. That's interesting. So what have you found, I'm sure it's changed somewhat over time, but what have you found are kind of the crucial factors that tend to push people towards an eating disorder?
Yeah. Well, I think, back in the day, we didn't have social media. That's all I am. So, but now, somebody's extreme diet could become somebody's motivation. And it's so sad. I just see it all the time. And so I think that's definitely a factor. I think there's just so many, there's always been fad diets. I mean, there's always been fad diets. I mean, they kind of get recirculated. But I think it's just this quest, that I could be better if I, do this diet. And I think there's just more access to it. Like there's more, you can do your own research, and find people who swear by it, or athletes that, are kind of unicorns and they could probably eat anything and they would just do well. And so, I mean, Atkins has gotten, the keto diet, all of that.
Sure. Just all sorts of different things out there. So, do you feel like part of this kind of leading question, right? But it seems like some people think it's very like all or none, right? Either have an eating disorder or I don't.
Right.
And I think more recently it's been like, no, this is on a spectrum.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I'm glad you brought that up. So one of the things I was talking to Mark about before this was something called orthorexia. And for those of you guys that haven't heard that term before, it's this desire to eat healthy and to where it becomes very obsessive. So it's not actually got its own diagnosis yet. Like it's not diagnosed clinically as an eating disorder, but it probably will be.
It should be there.
So I see that a lot, and kind of how that would portray itself is, clean eating or, just trying to avoid sugar, that kind of thing. And I have kind of a list of questions I wanted to ask too, in regards to that. Like, so I guess if you thought that maybe that was something that you were struggling with, then I would kind of look at some questions. Is it something that you obsess about all the time? Is it something that you just can't stop thinking about? And that's where we kind of see that it's crossed the border. And like you eliminate social activities because of the food you might be eating. And it also kind of goes into exercise too. People exercise in unsafe situations or when they're tired or sick, they don't ever take a break. So the exercise obsession actually goes along with that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. So we have this conversation with people all the time, right? That they're just like, I've got to keep going. I've got to keep hitting it. And we always tell people the only exercise that matters, the only training that matters is the training you can recover from, right?
Right. No, I think that's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also think too, it's almost looked up, people are admired,
like look how dedicated they are.
Right. But the problem is, especially if you're on a team, is, it only takes one person. Like, oh, look how well I'm doing. And then the whole team gets involved too.
Yeah, so it ends up being kind of like a team contagion then. Wow.
Right.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
Right.
So it's interesting. I was listening to another one of your interviews, and you were talking about how there's a lot of people that look healthy on the outside, but on the inside they really are not.
Exactly. Yes. I was working with one of the volleyball players up at Weber State, and she said she got comments all the time at how great she looked, but she could barely stand up. She would almost pass out after practice. And I guess just a message is, let's just not comment on people's weight, good or bad. Like, I think that's something that is kind of dangerous to do. And because you never know. You never know.
Well, that's so interesting because I think there's that connotation of like, oh, well, they look good, right? Like we should be praising them, and then unknowingly, like maybe helping to perpetuate that that disorder or that unhealthy way of thinking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. That is good. That's a good advice.
Yeah.
Let's not.
Catch yourself doing that, and just kind of stop doing that, and especially if you have kids too. Like you don't need to comment on their appearance, good or bad. So I mean, talk about, oh, I like your hair or I like your outfit or whatever, but don't talk about their weight.
Yeah. And I mean, it sounds like social media has really been a real negative for that experience too.
Yeah. Because again, you don't know what those people on social media are going through either.
Sure, right? Like here's the idealized version, and
yeah,
who knows what's happening behind the scenes.
Probably have some issues as well.
Yeah. What is there any data or what would you postulate in kind of like high school as well as collegiate athletes? What do you think would be the percentage of people with eating disorders or disordered eating? Right.
The NCAA did do some statistics. Let me just pull that up. So I don't know exactly when this study was done, but the NCAA did look at risk factors for anorexia in Division I athletes. And so obviously the sports that focus on appearance, like, diving and gymnastics, figure skating, but running as well. Sure. You kind of look at the uniforms people are wearing, and that's going to lead itself to that too. So volleyball can kind of fit into that as well. And so when we look at that, like it does really increase the risk. Okay, dang it. Where's that? See, this is why. Oh, I had this. Where was it?
I don't know. That's always my thing. I'm like, I know it's somewhere on my computer. I know where. I've read it before.
Oh yeah, here it was. Okay, sorry. Here it is. Okay. So the study on Division I NCAA athletes found that more than 1/3 of the female athletes were at risk for anorexia, and they reported attitudes and symptoms. So it's very prevalent. Yeah. And the males also have it too. Like even sometimes, the football players having to gain weight can also be a risk factor too. So the statistics they found was 33% of male athletes are affected in weight class sports. So if they have to make a weight, right? So wrestling, rowing, jockeys, horse racing, and bodybuilding, gymnastics, swimming, and diving. Okay. And then in female athletes in weight class and aesthetic sports, the eating disordered or disordered eating occurs at 62%. So it's really high. And that's, the general population is at risk as well, but athletes are even higher than that. Yeah. So, and the one thing that I want to talk about too is that treatment is not cheap. And a lot of times insurance doesn't cover this. So probably about 80% of people who seek treatment don't receive adequate treatment if they even seek it. Yeah. So only 1 in 10 people with eating disorders receive treatment.
Wow.
Because people think they think, oh, it's just my willpower, or because there's not just anorexia. There's also binge eating disorder and bulimia. And those bulimia and binge eating tend to have a little bit more shame associated with it. And they might look normal. Like they might just be normal looking people. Anorexic, usually most of the time people can tell, but not always. Yeah. So, there's a lot more shame in that, and they don't really want to seek treatment with that. So, or they just may think, I just need to go on another diet. I need to be stronger.
Oh man. Yeah. That just makes the shame storm just makes everything worse. And also just going back to anorexia for a minute. So anorexia can occur in a larger sized body, believe it or not. I have actually several patients. They're called atypical anorexics, and they are probably they live in a larger body, and so so doctors don't believe them. I mean, I can't even it brings me to tears sometimes what doctors say to patients, like tears. Yeah. So you do have to find the right doctor. Sure. To treat this, because a lot of physicians don't know. I think the sports medicine doctors kind of are looking for that in athletes, but the rest of the public kind of gets stuck with, you'd probably be healthier if you lost weight, so. Which just is not helpful.
Right. So it just contributes to that shame that they have. So, right.
That's interesting. So what are some, I know it's varied, right?
Right.
Again, it lies on a spectrum. What are some warning signs that friends or family or teammates or healthcare practitioners can look out for that might kind of flag them that, hey, maybe something's up, maybe this warrants a conversation.
Right.
And then, there's a big question, but then how to, like, what are some strategies to have those conversations without them being shame-inducing?
Right. Yeah. Because the thing is, especially with anorexia, well, a lot of people don't want to get better. I mean, they do and they don't. They think they can control themselves. But I think a lot of times if there's a significant weight loss or even a weight gain, that might be something. You'll kind of notice that they look at themselves in the mirror a lot. They're always we call that body checking. They don't eat in public. Like they'll maybe stop eating with people. They actually, the other funny thing is they watch cooking shows. Like, I mean, when I was anorexic, I baked a lot. Like you want to bake for other people, you want to cook for other people. And so that's kind of a sign and symptom. So they'll eat safer, healthy foods. They make a lot of excuses for not eating. They have a lot of rigidity. So around their eating and exercise. And they might wear, I haven't always found this, but sometimes they wear baggy clothing to try to hide it. But other times I don't always see that. That's not always a thing. So it's just, it can be very, I mean, when you're really noticing it, it really is very apparent, and especially with parents. Like if if they have an adolescent, like their personality changes. They become like very mean, kind of like very angry, and so a lot of times you'll just notice that change in behavior. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Interesting. And so. Yeah, man, that's it's gotta be tough. What's the difference between a moody teenager?
You try to when it's anorexic, I can tell you they're not nice.
Yeah. Oh goodness. So one of the handouts that you gave me, I'd love to have you talk more about that. So I think probably a lot of us just associated a lot of positivity with certain ways of eating, right? Like, oh, if you eat like this, like then you'll be healthy, right? Then you'll be doing the best thing. But from what you've talked about, that's not like the like whether the food is healthy or not, like how people feel around what they're eating and how they respond to that. That seems to be where the biggest problem lies. Right.
Yeah. And so when we look at normal eating, I mean, that can vary for so many people. Some people don't like breakfast food. They like savory food for breakfast. Some people, like sweets, and I think, we have to kind of get over that. Sugar in and of itself isn't that harmful. Just got to brush your teeth. That's probably the main thing. But, it can fit into a healthy diet. So, I mean, I have cookies a lot. Like I just eat normal stuff. If you looked at my grocery cart, it's normal. It's even more normal when my husband's around because he puts a lot of things in there that. And so just learning to be okay. You are not good if you eat a salad. You're not bad if you eat chocolate. Just not having your worth tied to how you eat. Yeah. And that's when it's a problem.
Yeah. Having worth tied to what you're eating. And I think that's so good that you point that out, right? Because we hear that everywhere, right? In the media, social media, right? Good, bad, right? That really false dichotomy, and we get stuck on those things.
Oh, yeah, so it's really hard.
People are like, I don't eat that. I remember this one guy in college, and he was just a string bean, but he didn't drink orange juice because it had too much sugar in it. Oh. And it's interesting, like, hearing some of these things now.
Isn't that funny?
I wonder, right? Like,
I think my parents... that's kind of how they grew up. There was good and bad food. I can remember distinctly when I was in junior high, my mom stopped making dessert. We used to make dessert, and I don't know if it came out on the news that wasn't good or whatever, but I remember I was like, And then I think, and my mom kind of struggled with weight. So I remember, she would do a lot of those diets and stuff. And I don't know if people remember this. They used to have this AIDS candy that was like, it was an appetite suppressant, but my brother and I'd get into that stuff all the time. We didn't know what it was. We thought it was good,
this is delicious.
Yeah, this is delicious. We're eating your AIDS candy. But so my mom went through it, but yeah, good versus bad. So think about this. And this is why, especially in families, I have such a concern with this. And I would say most of my eating disorder clients, the first step is dieting. I mean, they don't set out to have an eating disorder. They just wanted to maybe get healthier whatever. And so they started restricting, and then they started getting all these great feedback from people and how great they looked.
Yeah.
Or, you know, they feel this sense of control. And so it just kind of metastasizes into something different. But parents need to be careful, like not defining food as good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the books that I'm going to recommend is, especially for parents, is this one, Ellen Satter. So ellensatter.org, and we'll put that in the notes, right?
Yeah.
So this is called Your Child's Weight, Helping Without Harming. But she talks about the division of responsibility in feeding. And so I'll kind of tell you what this is, because this is how I raise my kids. But so the parent is in charge of the what, when, and where of eating. And the kids are in charge of if they eat and how much. Now, that may sound really scary to parents. They're like, my kid's not going to eat. But you know what? Kids aren't going to starve themselves normally. And kids also can tell when that division of responsibility has been crossed. I mean, there's so many other battles you can fight with your kids. Don't fight at the table. I'm telling you, if you just take that pressure off, kids will start to eat normally. I mean, I've had parents come to me, they've tried to pay their kids to eat vegetables. They've like all this stuff. And then I tell them to stop doing that. And they kind of get mad a little bit. Like, I'm like, well, how's that working for you? You know, like if you can't pay a kid to eat their vegetables. Yeah. So just offering food over and over again, not commenting, like, you know, really make mealtime enjoyable. Because I think that can be the root. Well, I mean, all of us, the root of it usually does start in childhood. So for the most part. So
yeah. So what were those again? The what? The
parents are in charge of the what, when, and where.
Okay.
And the kids are in charge of if and how much.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, your life at the table will be so much happier.
You're blowing my mind.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
So fun. Yeah, so fun.
So that's interesting, though, that you saw the root of that kind of starts in childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm guessing you find that just, like the environment that child's growing up on.
I mean, it comes with abuse, it comes with neglect, it comes with food scarcity. So, and I got to tell you, this pandemic has not been great for eating disorders. So,
really?
Yeah, because mental health is on the rise. I mean, this is a mental health condition. You know, you can see it in the body, but it's a mental health condition. And so people, for coping, becoming isolated and
And it's so unfortunate because you mentioned earlier that like insurances aren't really touching this and people don't like know how to help. What have you found has been most helpful in getting people the help that they need and in treating this?
So insurance will pay for residential treatment. A lot of insurances do. So that's usually what I recommend. When I have a patient that comes in that's pretty severe, so we kind of categorize, especially anorexics, as severe and moderate. But I have a lot of severe ones, and they're not really going to get better at home. Sometimes they just don't want to get better. So but treatment, we have 2 treatment centers in Utah, Center for Change, which is in Orem, and then Avalon Hills, which is in Logan. Both are great. And I find it's much easier to work with patients once they come out of there. So they've learned what they can eat, because the brain has to heal first. So especially in anorexia and bulimia too, your brain is starved of nutrition, and you can't heal a starved brain. In fact, counseling doesn't even work. I mean, they can't remember anything, you know? Yeah. So we have to get that brain healed. And then sometimes the healthy brain will just take over. Like, once it's fed, it's like, what was I doing, you know?
That's so interesting. Yeah. I mean, I don't think we think about that, right? When we think of energy deficiency, it's like, what's happening in my muscles and what's happening in my bones and what's happening with my hormones. And that's probably something that's often missed. But what I think I remember, the brain is using up like 22% of the daily energy or something like that. And so that's fascinating. Yeah,
right.
A starved brain can't heal. I
right.
like that. It's a good soundbite right there.
Yeah.
So with that, you've mentioned a couple times, like sometimes they don't want to change, right? Like
they're just so sick. They're so invested. They just can't. They're afraid they're going to gain weight. They're afraid. It's really scary. Yeah. It's really scary.
So it sounds like this kind of just ends up infecting every area of a person's life when they're dealing with things like that. Yeah.
And it is the high in adolescence. It's like the 3rd highest mortality. I mean, and a lot of them will commit suicide. I actually did lose a client to suicide, a 16-year-old.
Oh man, that must have been so hard.
It was really hard.
Yeah.
It was really hard.
Yeah.
So and it doesn't, education doesn't matter. I mean, it just affects everybody.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So, obviously there's kind of, again, that spectrum like we talked about. What are things that family members, coaches, and other things can help with to keep it from transitioning from like disordered eating to true eating disorder?
Yeah. Well, I think with coaches, we'll talk about that for a minute. And the NCAA does have actually a really good coach's guide. And I think I can give you that link too. I can get you that link.
Yeah, that'd be
It's really good. But just not focusing. I mean, obviously, I know you want to focus on performance, but you also have to take into account the athlete and make sure they're eating. Make sure you bring in professionals that can talk about the right way to eat. And what I mean by professionals is a registered dietitian. So sometimes you can get a strength coach in and they don't quite have the background. And so I worked with the Weber State athletes for many years, and currently they have another dietitian doing that, which is great. So just making sure it's a registered dietitian that you have working with your athletes. But I would ask them, how many times have you eaten before practice? If they have an afternoon practice, they should be eating 3 to 4 eating episodes before practice.
Yeah.
So ask them that. Because I can't tell you how many of the athletes I used to work with at Weber State, the runners, it's like they weren't eating enough. And I mean, we're talking high caliber people. And and so they would get injured, and, it can be fixed so easily.
Yeah.
So, and I find too, especially in college, the freshmen that come in, like they don't know how to manage their time. Mom always cooked for them, and we don't have a training table at Weber State. They get fed. They don't even have to make a decision. But our athletes have to learn how to do that. How to pack food for their day. I mean, it's a lot of planning that they're not used to doing.
Yeah.
And their training has increased. So
training's increased. You're out. Yeah, you're outside the home. You got to make sure you're getting on time with your classes and all the homework, and so do you think that's one of the triggers, is like having this kind of sense of, I know there's some component of eating disorders starting in the home often, but like there's this schedule, this routine, and then that gets thrown out the window.
So sometimes, with my freshman athletes, sometimes it's not really an eating disorder. It's just that they have gotten behind on eating, and they just don't realize how much they need. So a dietitian is just perfect to help them fix that, and then they can have a good running career. So, so that's what we see a lot of times, and then they're good to go. But, so coaches, if they can, again, just be very proactive with eating and nutrition, and, just get educated a little bit on it and what it looks like and what that can be. And then for parents, I think the same thing, just kind of being on the lookout. If your kid's eating changes, they're not eating with you anymore. And I am a big advocate of evening meals. If you can do that, I know sometimes sports schedules get crazy, but just try to find a way to make that happen as much as you can. And just being aware of your kids eating. And also the other thing too that can happen is they just stop eating certain foods. Like they'll stop eating foods they used to eat. And that's always a signal too.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Obviously, there's really a big conversation on mental health in this country going on right now, which I think is really to our benefit, right?
Yeah, I mean, Simone Biles, that's
yes, oh my God, thank goodness, right?
I know, right? Yeah.
Thank goodness because that takes a lot of courage to just step and say like, hey, I am struggling, right? I'm having a hard time. How do you build that conversation in about mental health and like help to destigmatize that for people? Because I think that's like it's getting better, but it's still there, right? Like I can't, like no. I think one of the thought patterns that's probably pretty common is like you mentioned, right? Like I can do this on my own. Like it's not that bad, or I don't need to talk to anyone about this, right? Like what are ways that you found that have helped destigmatize that for people and help them get the help that they need and develop healthier patterns of eating?
Right. Well, sometimes I share my story, which I think is helpful, and so I think especially with athletes, you can always get them because do you want to get better, because you can't continue on this path. I mean, the coach will say you're not practicing until we get your iron levels up or we get, whatever. But I think that it is hard. but just trying to really work with them. There's a lot of books that I might recommend for them. Brene Brown has done so much on shame research, right?
She's amazing.
And there's a lot of books, like one of the things I do want to talk about too is intuitive eating. And this does talk a lot about that as well, self-worth and shame and guilt, and trying to just, find the root cause of it. Because in a way, this is not about the food, but it is about the food, right?
Yeah.
So it's a mental health condition. So you have to figure out, most of the time we're using it to numb. We're using it to avoid certain feelings. And I mean, when I was in mine, I couldn't have told you what I was trying to avoid. I'm like, what the heck? But but slowly, especially if their brain gets nourished, we can start picking that apart.
Yeah.
So.
See, I love that. Like starving brain, getting the brain nourished. So that's really interesting. We know that food can be a coping mechanism. We know that exercise can be a coping mechanism. So that sounds like it kind of creates the perfect environment, or like the perfect storm for some of these negative sequelae to develop.
Well, and the eating disorder serves a purpose.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes if they can figure out what that purpose is, we can just come along beside it and just give them some other things to do, like other coping skills. But, what was the purpose of this? Is this how you survived your childhood? Is this, how you learned to combat with abuse, neglect, that kind of thing. So, it has a purpose.
Yeah. And so I think it sounds like being interested in what's going on versus like, you should be doing this, you should be doing that, why are you doing this, right? Like, kind of, I guess, bringing more shame in versus like letting them tell the story and encouraging healthy...
and I'm not a therapist, but, definitely sometimes... So all of my clients do have a therapist. Like, I do recommend that.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Because I am not a therapist. And really, it's great to work. I have several therapists that I work with, so we're in touch a lot. Yeah, so
that's awesome. So tell us a little bit more about the intuitive eating.
Okay, my favorite topic. Yeah. So intuitive eating does definitely have its place with eating disorder recovery. Now, when I was recovering, I didn't really have access to this, so I think I would have recovered a lot quicker had I. But you have to be in the right point of your recovery to be able to do intuitive eating. But intuitive eating is, it's a kind of a philosophy based on 10 different principles. So there's a lot that goes into this. It's not just, I feel like eating a candy bar today, I guess I'll have one. And I'm eating intuitively.
I think that's me,
Yeah, so there's a lot that goes into it. And one of the first principles is rejecting the diet mentality. And sometimes people just have to sit there. Like I had a client one time that we had an appointment scheduled, and she's like, nope, I'm going to do one more diet, and then I'm going to come see you. So literally, it was a year later, and she had gone on this diet, and she had gotten to her ideal weight, but she goes, I remember laying on the couch, like not being able to move. I was so tired. And so then she promptly gained all her weight back, and then she came to see me. And what was so funny about her, I love her. She was so great about her. She was getting a degree in nutrition. I'm like, what are you doing? Why are you getting a degree in nutrition? And so sure enough, she's like, I don't know. So now she changed. And I just emailed her not that long ago. And she's like, this is what I'm doing. I'm like, So it was so fun. Like she got healed. She got, into something that she was really interested in. And so anyway, it was just really cool. But anyway, so rejecting the diet mentality, we also go through what is appropriate hunger. A lot of times people, they don't recognize gentle hunger. They only recognize like ravenous hunger, right? So right? So we call it biological and primal. So, and we want you to eat so that you're not getting to that primal hunger. Yeah. Because then you're setting yourself up. So we talk about that. We talk about making peace with food. So like, as you said, not good or bad, but just making peace. Yeah. We talk about the food police, which actually I've dressed up for as Halloween before.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
Yeah. Just as the food police. But literally, again, just really those thoughts that come into your head that just trying to change those. And looks in the one thing about intuitive eating, though, that I think is so fascinating. Out of the 10 principles, another principle that we look at is satisfaction. And so eating for satisfaction. So if you eat and you're not hungry, you're probably not going to notice when you're full. You're not really going to notice if you're satisfied because food tastes better when you're hungry. Yeah. And so And then, of course, we also look at the fullness side of that, and that goes with satisfaction too, because food doesn't taste as good when you're full, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just,
absolutely. Yeah.
So it's really, and sometimes people say, I don't even know what I like to eat because I've been dieting so long. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Oh, I have chronic dieters. I mean, I have people that have been doing it forever.
Yeah, just jumping from
they
one
don't
to
know
the
who they
other.
are. Yeah, so they don't even know what they like.
Wow.
So, I mean, I have one person right now that I'm working with remotely, and so we've got her started on eating like 3 meals, some snacks, and she's like, she's pooping.
Oh, important. You want to be regular.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she's like, oh my gosh, I'm getting my hunger signals back. So you can, when you learn to feed yourself regularly.
Yeah.
And so there is a lot, like intuitive eating is not like counting calories or macros, but there is structure in feeding yourself appropriately and planning your food. Like Mark can attest, I brought my snack with me after my treadmill test today.
And it looked delicious.
Yeah, it looked delicious because I knew I'd be hungry.
Yeah.
But it didn't take much time for me to do that. I'm not obsessive about it, but I just know that I'll probably want something to eat,
Yeah.
So
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm always like, even with my kids, I'm like, have you eaten? I can tell when my daughter hasn't eaten.
That's so funny.
Angry.
It's like, do you have your coat to go outside? Did you? What
I know, that's
right?
being a dietitian.
Yeah.
That's my worry. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh man. So how did you discover the intuitive eating?
Okay. So, well, back in the day, like again, intuitive eating wasn't really there when I was recovering from my eating disorder, but there was another book out that I kind of can't remember the name of it right now, but there was somebody else that was kind of doing that. And then intuitive eating came out and I just hopped on board. So I've been using this for a long time. I'm a certified intuitive eating counselor.
Yeah.
And I also offer intuitive eating classes for athletes. And so we're going to put that in a link.
Yes,
right?
we'll link to that.
It's kind of an 8-week course and you can take it at your own leisure. And then I also have just a really mini sports nutrition class, also master class, for people just wanting just good solid sports nutrition information too.
Yeah.
But yeah, so intuitive eating I don't know, it just really linked with my brain. I was done dieting, I don't want to do this anymore. And I could eat according to my hunger and fullness. What a concept.
What in the world?
Yeah, but it's just so freeing. Like it's so awesome.
Oh.
Because you just sort of get to where, you eat based on how you want to feel. And so you develop a memory around food. I mean, sometimes I'll go to Maria's, Mexican restaurant.
Oh yeah,
and I'll eat her chips and salsa, right?
They're so good.
I might take my entree home because I'm full. Oh well.
Yeah. Yeah, no. So that's interesting, and that's what I learned to do. I even myself, like I'd be like, okay, I got to eat this whole thing, and I would just you just feel so gross.
Right.
And now that I'll often just take home half the entree.
Yeah.
And I get to enjoy it while I'm there, and then I get to enjoy it again. So it's doubly good,
right?
Yeah.
And so I give people this challenge. It's called the Costa Vida Burrito Challenge, right? So like eating half a burrito. Of course, it depends on if I've got a high school runner. Like, okay, well you can have the whole thing. But for most of us, half a burrito, it's like you're going to be in that kind of satisfied range. You're not really. I mean, you probably could eat more, but if you stop now, you'd be fine in 3 hours. And so that's sort of the type of eating, just do it as a challenge. And what feelings come up for you? Does that food scarcity come up? Does it feel like you're on a diet? Does it feel like, so we talk about it. So I give them homework. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I bet they love more homework.
Yeah. I mean, this is more my just kind of disordered eaters, not my eating disorder people.
Yeah. No, so I think that's really fascinating because there's there's the physiological feelings from not having the whole thing, but then what are all the other feelings and what do you think about and what do you feel and what happens, what's going on for you when you're changing
sometimes you feel like you've lost your best friend, because people get used to being a certain fullness level and then they're like, well, I don't know how to feel then, but they end up feeling better if they try it a few times.
So that's interesting that people don't understand the fullness level. Do you find that when people aren't eating as much as they did, they're worried that they're just not going to get enough, or
no, because we make sure they have food with them. So you're going to have to bring. Now this would be okay. We are not talking about eating disorders really anymore. We're talking more my intuitive eating clients.
Yeah.
So they are not eating disorders, but so we would have them bring food with them. I just make sure, and when you get hungry, and you eat.
Yeah.
You have to have permission to eat. So.
Yeah. That's so fascinating. So. Yeah, what's that like for your clients when that switch flips for them, when they're like, oh, this is what eating
They
can
have
be
a
like?
lot of aha moments,
Yeah.
I remember one client had this aha moment on a cruise, and she was sitting there going, I could have whatever I wanted right now, but what I want is a roast beef sandwich. And so she's like, wow, I think I got it.
Yeah.
It does, like stuff like that. When you can stop eating and you're like, wow, like that really was satisfying. I didn't feel like I had to eat the whole thing, or I didn't. It's kind of fun.
Well, that's so interesting because like sitting here, I can think about, oh, these are the foods that I like, and I really love this meal, and that just seems so crazy to me that people wouldn't know what they like. But it makes sense, right? Like there's all these different diets and
Right.
Yeah. And so how do you help people reframe versus like, diet after diet after diet versus just healthy eating?
Right. Well, the first thing is to get them, because intuitive eating is not a weight loss program. It is not a weight loss program.
Yeah.
And I tell them that over and over again. But then they'll come back like, it's not working. I'm not losing weight. I'm like, okay. So we have to get rid of that diet mentality. And sometimes they're not ready. And sometimes it's like, just come back when you're ready. Because, that's really what I do. I'm a non-diet dietitian. I don't like to do that stuff.
Love that.
Yeah. So I just, sometimes they're not ready, but I do kind of an assessment. We kind of talk about it. And the nice thing about intuitive eating, they've got a workbook that we go through. And so we can take it a step at a time. And so for my master class, you do have to get the workbook. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's very cool. No, Julie's got a lot of good resources. So we'll definitely link to those in the show notes so you can check those out. Sounds like some really helpful classes. Yeah. So we have, with some of the seasons ending, we're having a lot of people with stress fractures pop up, right? And so what would be your recommendations of what they focus on in the off season and what they do to prepare themselves for the coming year?
Right. So I think, in the off season, kind of maybe just learning how to kind of manage your food, like prepping your food, like what kind of food, experiment a little bit. Maybe you've got more time to cook. A lot of times too, I'll recommend people do like even citrus pear, the meal prep service. So maybe focus on your nutrition. Like how can you get the food that you want at your table? How much convenience food do you want to use? And when I say convenience food, I mean like, convenience food is great. Like, I mean, definitely. So, just depending on, how much you want to cook from scratch or, whatever. So you can mix and match. So maybe just trying to find out who you are, like with eating, and if this is off season, maybe this would be a good time to learn about intuitive eating. This might be a good resource for you to look at if you feel like your nutrition is off. But maybe experiment a little bit more, with different meals, different timing, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So.
Love that. Are there different things that you would talk about with like high school athletes versus college athletes versus kind of your just average recreational runner? And what are some of those things?
Well, for high school, because their food's pretty much provided, so they probably have access to a lot of different foods. Like probably money's not a problem, but so like I just met with one the other day, and so we just kind of talked about different things that she could try for breakfast and lunch, and needed kind of to work with her eating a little bit more before practice, like trying to work with that a little bit. So those athletes are pretty easy because they do have access to things. And usually the parents are pretty involved. Like I love it when the parents are involved. They have evening meals. We're just good to go. That's not always the case, but that's good. Yeah. Now the college athletes, again, especially at Weber State, we're working with, just getting food. Because they have to get their food. And so, sometimes we'll go to the grocery store. We will make grocery lists. I'll give them recipes, My husband and I teach a class, Nutrition for the Athlete at Weber State, that we try to get a lot of the athletes into because we have cooking classes and just real basic information.
How fun.
Yeah, it's really fun.
Yeah.
And then other athletes, again, they probably also have access to kind of unlimited resources. So sometimes it's just meal patterning. Like, here's when you need to eat, and let's talk about things that we could plug in there. So I just get kind of structured, really. Like, add structure to their eating. A lot of people are chaotic eaters, where they're like, okay, nutrition is important, but not in the moment. So trying to
future me can worry about this.
Yeah, exactly. Or, they like, you're not going to make a peanut butter sandwich in the morning. You're just not. You have to do it the night before.
Yeah, so true.
It's so true. They think they're going to do it, but they're not.
Yep. Yeah.
I know them.
Oh yeah. Present me is a really big jerk to future me. Oh yeah. I'll totally do it then. Yeah. And then you're like, oh, I gotta go. It's morning, right?
Yeah. I mean, you can freeze sandwiches. Freeze sandwiches. So make them on the weekend and freeze them. And then I used to say put your car keys in the freezer, but I think now with the new car keys, maybe that would. Might not work out so well. But when it's cooler, like I put stuff in my car the night before. Yeah. Like for this, I put stuff in my car the night before so I wouldn't forget.
There you go. I love it. Living the lifestyle.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. My brain,
No, I love that. So providing the structure, but in a way that sounds really fun, right? So
I think it's fun. Yeah, right. I don't know if they do, but I think it's so fun. To kind of.
I love that, but it sounds like a lot of like self-exploration of what works for them, what's helpful, what's not helpful, and in a really shame-free environment. So structure without shame.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Just being dependable about feeding yourself, Yeah. Sometimes we lose that in our lifestyles.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, and we find this in working with athletes that we do is that there's only there's a limited amount of time in each day, and there's things that we know will make us healthier, right? Like if I get enough sleep, if I have proper nutrition, if I give myself enough recovery, right? If I train enough for my body to be able to adapt. And those are often the first things to fall asleep when fall asleep. Apparently I need some more sleep. Those are some of the first things to fall away when time gets crunched, right? Yeah. Nutrition goes out the window, sleep goes out the window, right? All these things that help people, maintain a healthy lifestyle and recover from their workouts seem to just go by the wayside. And
you bring up a good point, actually. I don't know if you knew this, but okay, when you were talking about nutrition. So here's the other thing that can happen with these, diets and disordered eaters. Part of it is variety. So they're eating a very limited food list. So then when you start talking about, let's prep food, they don't want to because there's nothing that sounds good because there's nothing they're allowing themselves to have. Yeah. And food's just gotten boring. So that's part of the thing too. It's like, no, you can have this. You can, so variety is, again, that doesn't sell any books, but
it's the spice of life, though, isn't that what they say?
Yeah, exactly. I know, but so allowing themselves options. You know?
Yeah. That's so interesting because it's still structure, right? But in those cases, it's like structure. Like it's so rigid, but it's like it's. I guess it's more of a scaffolding, right? Like this is how you want to like plan things out, give it this type of structure so it can support the weight of everything else you're doing versus like everything has to fall in X, Y, Z. Yeah. That is so fascinating. And it's funny because like intuitive eating, right? Like when you describe the principles, it's like, oh, that makes so much sense, right? So I get the intuitive label, but one of those skills I think that you have to learn. So it sounds like that would be, if whether high schools or colleges were providing opportunities like the nutrition for athletes, like that would be a really good way to help people develop some of those skills because it's just not always learned in the home or taught in the school or
And again, a lot of the universities now have, I think the U of U has 2 sports dietitians on staff, so
you're like,
a lot of those schools are getting it. I know. Yeah.
So what are there other things that you think would be really good for our listeners to know or things that are really important to you that you like to get out there and like, please do this or please?
Well, I think, kind of what we talked about is like, let's stop commenting on appearance. Yeah. Let's stop doing that. Let's maybe start noticing, like if people are starting to eliminate food groups, if they're starting to, if they're going vegan and not that, it has to, that's a tricky one too. Like just taking, I guess, maybe a very restrictive approach to eating, that's something to notice and not necessarily be admired, And if there's things on social media that trigger people, I would just stop following that person. So, because all foods can fit. And so there should really be, there's no bad food.
Yeah.
There's no bad food.
What a great message, right? I love that. All foods can fit. Because that's so many people that I've talked about. I mean, even my own parents, right? The different diets that they do, and it's like, you can't eat this, right? And I just, it kills me to hear some of the things that people do, because I'm like, well, isn't that just perpetuating the problem that, like, you're just shifting you're just shifting things for a while until, I mean, what's the statistic on people that go on diets? Like, it's gaining it back plus 5 to 10% of the original, something like that.
There's a 94% failure rate.
Yeah.
There's that.
You know, a little high. Yeah. And what would you say is the underlying problem with all diets?
They're not satisfying. So it's just hard to stick with them.
Yeah.
And people feel restricted. They miss their foods.
Yeah. Do you just kind of hate the word diet itself? Like...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Except I put myself, I'm a non-diet dietitian.
Yeah. But then that way, like, it's nice because you end up not pigeonholing into, we have to do it this way, we have to do it that way. Like, again, I think it sounds like it goes back to that structure, but freedom to explore within that structure versus good or bad.
Right.
Like that.
Right. Yeah.
Getting rid of some of the artificial categories and being okay with things.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, that's so fascinating. So what advice would you give to someone who's maybe recognizing some of these behaviors in themselves?
So I think reaching out, there's a National Eating Disorder Association. We'll give the link for that. And, maybe talking, if you're, depending on how old you are, talking to your parents or your coach. I'm available to. So whatever, your doctor, if you feel like that's an appropriate conversation to have, we'll put a lot of links for resources on there. So, and maybe looking at getting counseling too would be helpful.
Yeah, fantastic. And I know we kind of went over some of these things with intuitive eating, but what would be some of your top tips for people that just want to develop a more healthy relationship with food?
Yeah. Well, I think, the all or nothing approach, it doesn't usually work. Good food versus bad food doesn't work. Just trying to allow more variety in your diet and, looking at, and then really just looking at how does this food make you feel? Do you feel good? Do you feel bad? How does that work? And sometimes it's also amounts of food. Like sometimes people say, I can't eat. Candy makes me feel bad. I'm like, well, you can eat sugar in moderation. You really can.
Yeah.
And it tastes fine, like, so sometimes it's like that becomes all or nothing. I can't, one cookie, you have to have 10. And so then your relationship is, well, I can't have cookies because they make me feel bad. Well, 10 of them might, but a couple of them probably not.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Because, I think even for me, I'm like, I probably shouldn't eat more of that now. But I think the difference for me, and maybe this is what's helpful, is it's like, I would love to eat more. I don't want to because I want to continue to live a healthy lifestyle. Like I still eat the stuff, right? Like I have cookies and cakes and cobbler and all that good stuff. But I think it's like being able to manage what I want right now versus how I want to continue to live and show up in the future.
Okay, so what if we take that a little? Okay, let's talk about it.
Ooh, this is good.
Because what I would say to you is, why don't you just be in the moment? Like, how does that make you feel? Like, I don't think I would necessarily take it to, I want to, where I'm going to be worried about disease. Where does that sound? But just be in the moment. Be where your feet are. Be mindful. Like, how does that make you feel? And, the thing is, your body isn't going to thrive or really enjoy eating brownies for every meal.
That is true.
So,
I've tried that for a couple meals in a row.
It doesn't feel good. So your body will give you that feedback. So your prefrontal cortex is your brain, right? Like that is the part where it tells us if we have to pee, whatever. And that's also where our hunger and fullness is. So all we do is have to pay attention. Yeah. We just have to use that.
Yeah.
So
I really love that because I appreciate you pointing that out because this is so interesting. I'm thinking like, this is. I think it kind of goes into the good and bad thinking. Congratulate myself for doing this. And so I think that's fascinating. I wonder if that's a danger area for some people. It's like, oh, well, like
in the sake of wellness or in health, absolutely.
Yeah, in an effort to be like the fittest or the healthiest or whatever, like I end up maybe veering off on this road that maybe isn't a great idea to go off on. Yeah. That is no. So I think this is great because I love that. Like it's having accountability to yourself, like what you're feeling, what you're thinking. And that seems to be the problem that you mentioned before, right? People don't know what they like. There's this disconnect between what's going on, like mentally and physiologically. Yeah. You know, like there's a disconnect between food and the experience of food. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a great distractor. Food's a great distractor.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. It's a good thing to keep you occupied, right? I think on like road trips, I'm just like, pistachios. That's my road trip. My road trip food. Yeah. No, that is fascinating because again, I think road trips, right? I used to stop and I'd be like, oh, we'll get some McDonald's here or this there. And I found that like it was nice, it was convenient, but if I did that too many times, like I just like it was rough to stay awake on the thing. I just felt gross inside versus when I'd like do that occasionally, right? Like, oh, let's stop here real quick, or I really like this restaurant versus like, man, I know if I like things like the pistachios or grapes or things like that help me feel good and keep me going. So I love that, like having that variety, being okay with those things, and then determining like, how do I feel around food? What's behind this?
Right. Yeah.
I love this. No, this is eye-opening. It's so good because I think it's things that even I myself, like I don't take a look at those things often, and I think all of us have those times when it's just like, oh man, like I'm really tired, I'm really stressed, or hey, there's a movie on, let me just eat.
Right. So so not distracted eating, so not mindless eating, like being present, like really being able to taste it. Which is so funny because I remember earlier you said when you haven't eaten in a while, then like food tastes so good, and I think about the time, right? You've had a fast, and then you're like, this oatmeal is the best oatmeal that's ever been made in the world. It's so good. Yeah. And so, I love this. I love this stuff. So are there any last tidbits of advice or things that you want to talk about before we close out? I think just realizing that eating can mimic your life, like if there's things going on in your life, then sometimes eating will also mimic that. So like I said, like chaotic people, like, maybe you're kind of a procrastinator or you're always, waiting to the last minute or, and your food can kind of fit into that. But you can always change that. And I think just looking at food as not a moral regulator, like again, it's not your self-worth. And if it becomes your self-worth, then that's when you need to get help. So, yeah.
Oh, I love it. Well, this has been like such an eye-opening and fascinating conversation. So I just always love learning about stuff like this. And I think another plug to see someone like Julie is we all need help with different things, right? We want to get better at our sport, right? We hire a coach. We want to get more mentally well, right? We go to mental health counselor. Like we want to develop a more healthy relationship with food and learn how to fuel ourselves. Like seeing someone who's a registered dietitian, who's gone to school, who's gotten that training, who knows how to help you with those things and provide you with the resources and tools to manage a more healthy and aware eating pattern.
Yes.
Yeah. So if people want to find you, where can they find you?
So I have a website, juliehansennutrition.com.
Perfect. Yeah. And we'll link to that in the show notes. Like Julie talked about, she's got several course offerings that sound just super awesome and sound like they've been really helpful for people. Any books that you recommend? I know you brought a couple with you.
Yeah, my intuitive eating. And also, the last one I have is a book written, this is more specific for eating disorders. It's called Sick Enough by Jennifer Gaudiani, a physician. And I would say this is really, it's kind of for lay people, but also for professionals as well. So it can be, especially coaches, parents might be a good resource for them if they suspect.
Yeah. And then I like that one
the
again.
Ellen's, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Your Child's Way.
She's also, so I always get this, not this particular one, but there's another one that she has that I give people when they're having babies. So, yeah. So she has another one called Secrets of Feeding a Healthy Family. And so she's got great resources. And she's kind of the same thing as intuitive eating. So,
okay. Oh,
it's really good.
I love it. Yes. A plug for intuitive eating.
Yeah.
And I love that, being more aware around what you're choosing to do. So thanks so much for coming on
welcome.
today.
Thanks
We loved it. It was an awesome conversation and got some good tips. And then we'll have some wonderful resources to link to in the show notes. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks for listening to Running Unbroken. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and reach out if you or someone you know has a story to share.